जो मेजर अनाउंसमेंट है वो तो आखिरी 2 स्लाइड्स में है। उससे पहले जो बैकग्राउंड है इस निर्णय तक पहुंचने की, वो आपको सेक्रेटरी डीएफएस ने बतलाई है। स्वाभाविक है कि पिछले कई वर्षों से पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक्स हैं, उनके सामने एक विशेष चुनौती रही है। संख्या में वो बहुत ज्यादा थे और जो 2008 से लेकर 2014 तक का पीरियड था, वो एक प्रकार से पीक लेंडिंग पीरियड बन गया, जो नॉर्मल से अलग था। 2008 से पहले कुल मिलाकर 18 लाख करोड़ की लेंडिंग हुई थी और इस पीरियड में जो 6-7 साल की अवधि थी, 55 लाख करोड़ की हुई। Prior to 2008, it was 18 lakh crores. Post that period, it was 55 lakh crores. Now, various adjectives have been used by people who were in position. Some have described it as unprofessional, some have described it as disproportionate. And the nature of the lending was that as though there is no tomorrow. The banks have to be emptied out before 2014. And that took its toll on the economy. This was accompanied by another step, which was really to hide the NPAs below the carpet. They were being swept below the carpet so that the real picture doesn't come out. और एक बयान कई बार पढ़ने को मिलता है कि 2014 में तो एनपीए 2.5 लाख करोड़ के थे, लेकिन जब आरबीआई ने 2015 में एसेट रिव्यू किया तो पता चला कि ये 2.5 लाख करोड़ नहीं था, ये 8.5 लाख करोड़ था। और ये 8.5 लाख करोड़ छुपाकर 2.5 लाख करोड़ के रूप में दिखलाया जा रहा था। जो अलग अलग प्रकार से रीस्ट्रक्चरिंग करना, एवरग्रीनिंग करना, उससे एनपीए बढ़ रहे थे। तो ये तो 2015 के बाद, इट्स ओनली आफ्टर 2015, once the real picture was known, that both the government and the RBI started taking concrete steps. And the first step, of course, was to recognize the reality. And the reality was that the NPAs were 8.5 lakh crores on account of that adventurous lending between 2008 and 2014. Subsequent to that period, the two principal factors which contributed to the NPAs was that the RBI wanted the banks to make a provisioning, because the RBI felt that some part of these NPAs would never be recovered. They were not backed up with adequate securities. And the second, of course, was that the interest calendar goes on. That machine keeps running. और इससे बढ़ते गए। और कुछ लोग अपने आप को धोखा देने के लिए कहते हैं कि 2.5 लाख था, बाद में कैसे बढ़ा। पहले आपके पाप छुपे हुए थे, जब पाप सामने आ गए तो पता चला कि पाप 2.5 लाख का नहीं था, 8.5 लाख का था, और उस पर ब्याज भी लगता है, प्रोविजनिंग भी करनी पड़ती है बैंक्स को। तो इसलिए दो तीन चैलेंजेस थे। बैंक क्रेडिट लेंडिंग कमजोर हो रही थी, उससे प्राइवेट सेक्टर की इन्वेस्टमेंट कमजोर हो रही थी, और कई बैंक्स फ्रेजाइल कंडीशन में थे, और इसलिए कई कदम उठाए गए। डीआरटी का कानून बदला गया, सिक्योरिटाइजेशन का कानून बदला गया, कई और कानून लाए, और फिर यह माना गया, कुछ समय लगा उसको ड्राफ्ट करने में, कि इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंकरप्सी कोड के अतिरिक्त कोई और रास्ता नहीं है। एंड दिस वाज, आई थिंक, in the debtor-creditor relationship, the IBC is a defining movement. As I have repeatedly said, the creditors chasing the debtor in the pre-IBC regime, that culture ended. And a new culture of lending has begun. Of course, there has been a very significant reform that we made to give greater flexibility to our bankers by the amended provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act also. So the twin challenge really is to bring down the NPAs. Initially, it was difficult because provisioning was, even though they had cash profits, provisioning did not really permit the cash profits to surface. And now that the IBC assets are getting new promoters and the monies are coming in, I think it's had a significant difference. Section 29A, which was brought by the First Amendment to the IBC, itself has had an unintended consequence. When it was drafted and legislated, the object was that the defaulters who ran down the companies should be denied a right to take over. Because if the same management comes back with only the banks taking a haircut, then nothing has changed. But the unintended consequence has been that potential defaulters now know that once they cross the red line and the company goes into the NCLT through the IBC process, one thing is certain, that they will be out. And therefore, in order to prevent themselves from breaching the red line, potential defaulters have started generating resources and paying up. So besides the monies which have started trickling in through the IBC process itself, there has been a significant increase in what the potential defaulters are paying up in order to save themselves from the default. Obviously, a new mechanism like this takes time. In the initial stages, legal provisions are interpreted. The Supreme Court recently made a very encouraging observation that you can't get into legal challenges at every stage, because effectively that's holding up the bank resources, which must be plowed back into the economy itself. And therefore, we do see the NPA curve, which initially came down because of disproportionate lending, and then because of interest and provisioning, it had to come down for some reasonable time, is now taking a turn. The curve itself has started moving and turning. So hopefully we should look for each quarter as better than the previous one. If you recollect, the government had announced in the budget that consolidation of banks will also be on the agenda of the government. in the first step, we had consolidated the 5 subsidiaries of the State Bank with the State Bank in order to make a mega global bank. The LIC has been, for several years, been very keen to have a bank of its own because most of its competitors have banks or are bank-promoted insurance companies, and there is synergy between the two businesses. So while we were working out ways of bringing down the government equity in the IDBI, the LIC considered it appropriate to make an offer because it suited their commercial interests in order to strengthen the synergy. And we were waiting before moving further for the situation to start turning somewhat. And therefore, this major decision was taken by the alternate mechanism today to amalgamate the Bank of Baroda, Dina Bank and Vijaya Bank. While making this suggestion, we have borne in mind that we don't want a merger of what are relatively weak banks. You can have 2 well-performing banks absorbing a third one in the amalgamation process and hopefully creating a mega bank which will be sustainable, whose lending ability will be far higher. Nobody should have a worry because this amalgamated entity will increase the banking operations. Its ability to increase and expand will be inevitable. No condition of service, and this is an announcement I had made when the 5 subsidiaries of the State Bank merged into the State Bank, that no employee will face a service condition which is anyway adverse in nature to his present service conditions. On the contrary, the SBI experience has been that amongst the merging and the entities and the new entity, the best of the service conditions continue to apply to all of them. So the employees of a relatively smaller bank, if at all, would get an opportunity to improve their banking working conditions. And the government has suggested it to the banks to consider this proposal. And hopefully, the banks will shortly, their boards will meet, and after adequate consultation, they will take an appropriate decision in this regard.
So will one bank be buying another one, or
It's an amalgamation, as we've said.
will it be a share swap kind of a thing?
Well,
Okay.
normally there would be, but that whole scheme of amalgamation would come.
What will be the name of the new bank, and
That we'll let you know.
what happens to Dena Bank, which is already on the reg? So, you said 2 good banks and 1 bank, so how does this take forward in terms of...
Well, I think it's good news for all the employees of Dena Bank. They become a part of a far stronger bank than they are today. Their services are secured and they will probably stand to get conditions better than the ones that they have. देखिए, जब स्कीम ऑफ अमेलगमेशन आएगी सामने बन के, अभी तो हम उस स्टेज पे हैं कि हमने उनको सुझाव दिया है, बैंक के बोर्ड्स इसको कंसिडर करेंगे. जब कंसिडर करके वो अपने निर्णय देंगे तो उसके बाद एक स्कीम ऑफ अमेलगमेशन बनेगी, तो ये सारे विषय उसमें आएंगे. देखिए, we are not writing a story that the timeline ends this evening. So it's a major economic commercial decision, So,
सर, ये तीनों बैंकों को रिकैपिटलाइजेशन जो किया जाएगा, तो तीनों बैंकों के अलग अलग ज़रूरतें जो अभी हैं उसके आधार पर की जाएंगी, या फिर मिलने के मर्जर के बाद एक होगा उसके आधार पर किया जाएगा?
देखिए, बैंक्स को मजबूत रखा जाए, अब वो प्रोसेस कितना चलता है उसके ऊपर निर्भर करेगा। लेकिन जैसा मैंने सर्विस कंडीशंस के बारे में कहा, तो गवर्नमेंट के लिए कमिटेड है कि जो पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक्स हैं उनका एक बहुत बड़ा योगदान रहा है इस देश में, और इसलिए हमने 2 ट्रांचेस में ऑलरेडी 70,000 करोड़ एक और 2,12,000 करोड़ एक का रिकैपिटलाइजेशन किया है पिछले 3 वर्षों में, और वो दिशा चलती रहेगी।
सर, चालू कारोबारी साल में और कोई ऐसे मर्जर का प्रस्ताव ऐलान करेंगे?
ये मैं कोई स्पेक्युलेटिव इशारा नहीं करूंगा।
Yes. Sir, all these banks have strong regional identities, Vijaya Bank and Dena Bank in itself. How do you will take this forward?
Well, that will, if at all, that regional identity will continue to expand, because as a stronger bank, even with their regions, they will expand. Not necessarily. That we can leave to the management of the banks, because I don't see their operations anything but expanding. Because that's been our experience with the SBI also.
Yes. Sir, RBI was also asked for suggestions on consolidation. So is this one of the suggestions? Have they reverted back with their suggestions?
Pardon?
RBI was also asked by the Finance Ministry for suggestions on
Yes,
consolidation.
we've had consultations with the RBI.
Sir, one more quick question on the timing of this announcement, because, you have given a proper background on that, but we were still under the impression that probably, we are still waiting for some more recovery to come in, and, then we go ahead with this roadmap. Also, sir, at this time, look at the rupee, look at the overall macroeconomic situation, though a very clear-cut statement has come in after the high-level meetings at PM's level. But the question still arises, probably some people will still have this thing that why the announcement right now?
Well, I think this is an economic analysis of the 1960s. The move is good, but what was the timing? This is the kind of write-ups I used to read when I was a kid. It's obvious that if you have a global challenge relating to crude oil prices or the strengthening of the dollar as happened last night, business as usual in other areas of governance doesn't come to a standstill.
Sir, how do you see the markets?
In fact, that's a sign of confidence that we have within the system.
Sir, how do you see the markets reacting today on the rupee front and rupee depreciation and Goldman Sachs downgrading India after major decisions on the weekend?
You see, these are impacts of a very significant global phenomena which are going on. You have at least 3, if not more, indications globally coming of what are the nature of things which are happening. One is the squeeze which has been put on oil production, upsetting the demand-supply ratio, which is increasing the crude oil prices. The second, of course, is the trade war. And we don't know when we are going to see the end of it. It, of course, impacts a major currency in our region, China, and therefore that creates an upheaval in this region. And the third, of course, is the internal economic decisions of the US, along with some of these decisions which are leading to the further strengthening of the dollar. So if you see the dollar index early morning today, it's significantly strengthened. And that's had a significant impact on currencies in the region at least.
If you permit me to ask a small supplementary question, what is your assessment on the ILFS now defaulting?
Well, I am not making any comment on this. Let their board and their shareholders who are dealing with the matter deal with it. The government need not at the moment comment on this subject.
Sir, Ujjwal from News, right? I want to know what was the basis of selection of these three banks. Did the board of all the three banks or any one of them have
Well, this is the government's assessment, because one of the banks is under PCA, and therefore we want to save all these banks, and therefore when you make a merger, you want to ensure that the merged entity is a stronger entity. And therefore, our capacity to subsume a relatively weaker bank into that merged entity, which will be a stronger bank, is the principal factor which weighs with the government. Of course, we see the All India expanse and so on. And after the government in principle makes up this opinion, it suggests to the banks to consider it. And we'll await for the response of the banks.
Sir, Tushar from Cogensis, sir. Sir, will you also seek the approval of minority shareholders for this amalgamation, and will an open offer be triggered when this amalgamation goes through, sir?
Well, whatever is the procedure we followed with regard to earlier amalgamations, whatever are the legal requirements, we'll comply with that.
Sir, just a small clarification. Do we need to amend the Nationalization Act for the amendment, for the amalgamation?
It's the scheme of amalgamation which will be formed as per the process. And the scheme of amalgamation will go to the parliament. It will be laid there for 30 days. There's no change in the amendment.
Yes.
No change.
Sir, good evening.